It was in fact initiated by the US, but it was taken over in a very short space of time because the US had too many problems, and the first problem they had was a financial crisis created by something called the long-term capital management. That wasn't so long-term after all. And then it was finance ministers and central bank governors, and we'd worked together on developing rules for engagement, rules for the Bank for International Settlements, and engaging also with the World Bank and IMF, and that was largely the focus. And then in 2008, when Lehman Brothers collapsed, there was a great recession, and at that point there was no money. And heads of state were convened, and the meeting took place on the 2nd of April 2009 in London, and then the question of what needed to be done. My own sense is that it's grown too big, too wide, too diverse, and without a strong institutional center, anybody could just make a call, and somehow you've got to try and bring it back to the core. And the core issues at the moment, I think, are represented in the measures of the quality of life of people, not just in the G20 countries, but across the world. Poverty and inequality, to which we have to add issues like climate change, are the dominant themes. And then questions about financial resources and financial flows. Those become the issues that I hope the G20 will be able to return to and examine on an ongoing basis, because there's no point in talking about everything and nothing when we haven't been able to adequately resolve matters that relate to better equity in the global economy and improvement in the quality of lives of people.
It's not the first time South Africa hosted the G20. As the former finance minister, you've done that at that time at the ministerial level and central bank governors. But this time around, what's your view? What should South Africa focus on? Because as you pointed out, lots of issues on the table, you'll end up not getting anything.
The interesting challenge now is that we've come at the end. We're the last of the 20 countries to host the G20. We're also the last of the South countries to host the G20. We've been able to benefit from the impetus of those who've gone before us: Brazil, India, Indonesia, who've been immediately before us, and each one of them has planted a stake that leads to development. In fact, you can go back even further to South Korea, because they actually dealt with developmental issues in quite a progressive way, because they weren't a country in need of development resources. So I'm saying if you trek back across the 20 years, there are a number of gems, and hopefully analysts will now take out these gems and ask the tough questions, because this is a new cycle. And in taking the new cycle forward, the question has to be, what gets carried forward, what is recognized as unresolved, what remains as opportunities to drive forward improvements in the world. Somewhere, and I hope that the United Nations will be equipped differently to deal with the issues of war. And now you've got a situation where NATO has increased the spending on war, and it doesn't bode well for countries. And I look at the African continent, I look at Sahel, I look at Sudan, I look at DRC, I look at Mozambique. It's a very, very difficult issue. And war is the antithesis of development. That's what we need to understand. I mean, I look at Sudan, one of the oldest countries on this continent. I look at the history of the Sudan. I look at the fact that there are pyramids older than those in Giza in Egypt, and everything gets destroyed in war. It's a deep, deep tragedy, and we should never allow war to be celebrated in the same way as we feel about Palestine at the moment.
On the report, good observations. How do we ensure that we implement the content? Perhaps one or two issues.
I think that there are a number of low-hanging fruits. I think that the gold at the IMF is a low-hanging fruit. I think that the Debtors Club is a low-hanging fruit. In fact, we make a very clear recommendation inviting the Minister of Finance in South Africa to convene his counterparts on the continent to begin driving that. You need a voice. Those become big and important issues in the short term. We hope to also take forward the idea that the work can be done in a way where we better understand the economies of various countries, so that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is not just a high-level agreement, but actually converts into something that unleashes economic energy and improves the quality of life.
And finally, the U.S. is a thorny issue, not participating this time around, but also the frosty relations on trade, but also political level. What do we do as a country with the U.S. being such a hot potato?
I don't know. Fortunately, I'm not in government, and I don't have to rack my brains about that. But it is obviously a very difficult issue, and part of the difficulty that I see. Now, bear in mind, I'm not a minister, I'm not an important person like, do you know that chap, Crispin Peary? I'm not an important person like that. I'm just an old pensioner. And part of what I see is that there's difficulty. A few weeks ago, there was the announcement that Vice President J.D. Vance would come. And then no representatives from the U.S. would come. There was nothing that triggered it. It's just a fitted peak that triggers us. And I don't think that's a basis on which to take decisions anywhere.